The fluorescent hum of the corporate office at 3 a.m. was a sound Mr. Henderson knew intimately, a low thrumming pulse against the quiet rhythm of his broom. For 35 years, he had been the unseen guardian of this towering structure, a silent fixture in its bustling daytime life. His days began before the first rays of dawn touched the city skyline, his nights often stretching long past the last executive's departure. He moved through the polished corridors with a practiced grace, a man whose every motion was a testament to decades of dedication. Each wiped surface, every emptied bin, spoke of a meticulousness that bordered on reverence. This wasn't merely a job for Mr. Henderson, it was a pact, a silent understanding with the building itself, and, by extension, with the company it housed. His connection ran deeper than the superficial grime he swept away. He knew the building's secrets, the creaky floorboard on the third floor, the finicky thermostat in Conference Room B, the exact time the automatic lights would flicker in the executive wing. He remembered the faces of countless employees, from their nervous first days to their triumphant farewells, always offering a quiet nod or a knowing smile. He had seen the company grow from a fledgling startup into a formidable industry giant, and in his own unassuming way, he felt he had grown with it, nurturing it from the shadows. His presence was so ingrained, so constant, that most employees barely registered him, yet his absence would have been a seismic shift they couldn't quite articulate. Then came Mr. Thorne. Young, sharp-suited, and radiating an almost palpable aura of ambition, he strode into the CEO's office like a conqueror claiming new territory. His vision for the company was clear: ruthless efficiency, streamlined operations, and an unwavering focus on the bottom line. He saw numbers, not people, and every expense was scrutinized under his cold, calculating gaze. To Thorne, the office was a machine, and any part that didn't contribute directly to its output was, by definition, redundant. He arrived with a reputation for turning companies around, often leaving a trail of dismissed employees in his wake, all justified by the sacred mantra of progress. Mr. Henderson, with his modest salary and seemingly antiquated role, was an immediate target. Thorne viewed him not as a human being with decades of loyalty, but as an unnecessary line item on a spreadsheet, an anachronism in his sleek, modern corporate vision. The idea of an aging janitor, whose primary function seemed to be the emptying of wastebaskets, struck Thorne as an inefficient allocation of resources. He envisioned automated cleaning systems, outsourced contracts, anything that stripped away the personal, the human, from the cold calculus of corporate profit. One particularly late night, the city lights painting geometric patterns on the office windows, Mr. Henderson found himself slumped in a worn armchair in the deserted break room. The day had been long, his arthritis a persistent ache in his knees, and the quiet warmth of the room was an irresistible lullaby. His head drooped, his eyes fluttering closed, and for a few precious minutes, the world of dust and polish faded into a gentle, dreamless sleep. His broom lay propped against the counter, a silent sentinel, as the old man finally succumbed to exhaustion. It was precisely at that moment, as if fate itself had orchestrated the scene, that Mr. Thorne emerged from his office. He often worked late, fueled by caffeine and an insatiable drive. He paused, his sharp eyes narrowing, observing the sleeping figure. A faint, almost imperceptible sneer touched his lips. He didn't see a tired man who had given his life to the company. He saw a liability, a symbol of the outdated practices he was determined to eradicate. The image of the slumbering janitor solidified his conviction, providing the perfect, tangible evidence he needed to justify his impending decision. The CEO stood there for a long moment, the silence of the night heavy with unspoken judgment, before turning on his heel and retreating into the shadows of the executive corridor. His mind was made up, a swift, cold calculation, but the true ramifications of that decision, the unseen ripples it would send through the very fabric of the company, remained hidden, waiting to unfold. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. The next morning, the corporate office buzzed with an unusual tension. Employees exchanged hushed whispers, their glances darting towards Mr. Henderson's usual cleaning cart, now conspicuously absent from its corner near the elevators. Mr. Thorne, however, moved with a brisk, almost triumphant air, a subtle smirk playing on his lips as he entered his office. He had acted swiftly, decisively. A curt email had been dispatched to Human Resources before dawn, followed by a brief, impersonal meeting with Mr. Henderson himself, conducted in the sterile confines of a small, windowless interview room. There, Thorne had delivered the news with practiced detachment, citing restructuring for efficiency and optimization of resources as the primary reasons. He had offered a severance package, a meager sum that barely acknowledged 3.5 decades of service, and then dismissed the old man with a wave of his hand, eager to move on to more pressing matters. Mr. Henderson, his face a mask of bewildered shock, had listened in silence. The words echoed in his ears, hollow and meaningless. Restructuring? Efficiency? All he understood was that the company, his company, the one he had nurtured and protected, no longer needed him. His hands, gnarled from years of scrubbing and lifting, trembled slightly as he clutched the termination letter. His heart, which had swelled with quiet pride for this place, now felt like a lead weight in his chest. He managed a barely audible, "Yes, Mr. Thorne," his voice raspy with unspoken emotion, before turning slowly and leaving the room. Each step felt heavy, as if the very floors he had polished for so long were now resisting his departure. He walked to his small locker in the basement, a space he had considered his own sanctuary for decades. Inside, his few meager belongings awaited: a worn thermos, a faded photograph of his late wife, a tattered copy of a mystery novel he had been slowly reading during his breaks. As he packed them into a cardboard box, his movements were slow, deliberate, each item a tangible link to a life that was now abruptly severed. The silence of the basement, usually a comforting presence, now felt oppressive, mocking. He thought of the countless mornings he had arrived here before anyone else, the quiet satisfaction of knowing he was preparing the stage for another day of corporate drama. Now, the stage was being reset without him. A single tear, unbidden, traced a path down his weathered cheek, a testament to the profound heartbreak he felt. This wasn't just a job, it was his identity, his purpose. As he emerged from the service entrance, carrying his cardboard box, a few long-term employees, those who had known him for years, caught sight of him. Their faces registered a mixture of surprise and sympathy. A whispered, "What happened, Mr. Henderson?" from a junior accountant went unanswered. No one dared to speak louder. No one dared to intervene. The air was thick with the unspoken understanding that challenging Mr. Thorne's decisions was a perilous undertaking. Some offered small, sad smiles. Others simply averted their gaze, uncomfortable witnesses to a quiet injustice. They knew Mr. Henderson. They respected his dedication. But the fear of the new CEO was a powerful deterrent, silencing any inclination to protest. He simply nodded faintly, a ghost already beginning to fade from the building he had called home. Inside his opulent office, Mr. Thorne leaned back in his leather chair, a satisfied exhale escaping his lips. He reviewed the morning's productivity reports, noting the immediate, albeit minor, cost savings from Henderson's dismissal. This was progress, he mused, a necessary step in streamlining operations. He truly believed he was improving the company, stripping away the inefficiencies, cutting the dead wood. His vision was clear, unclouded by sentimentality. The old ways were obsolete, and he was the harbinger of a new, leaner, more profitable era. He envisioned a future where every single aspect of the company was optimized, a perfectly oiled machine humming with maximum output. However, almost imperceptibly at first, a subtle shift began to occur in the corporate office. It started small, easily dismissed as minor inconveniences. A coffee machine in the break room, usually sparkling clean, now had a persistent ring of dried coffee around its base, the sugar dispenser often empty. A stray piece of paper, fluttering from a desk, would remain on the polished floor for hours, sometimes days, before someone grudgingly bent down to pick it up. The recycling bins, once meticulously sorted, now overflowed with a chaotic mix of plastics and paper. These were not major issues, not yet, but they represented a departure from the almost invisible order that had always permeated the building. One afternoon, a new executive, rushing to an important presentation, found himself fumbling with a projector that refused to connect. He swore under his breath, remembering how Mr. Henderson, with uncanny foresight, would often appear just then, offering a quiet, "Looks like the HDMI cable's loose again, sir," before seamlessly resolving the issue. Now, there was no such guardian angel. The executive eventually fixed it himself, but the delay had rattled him. These were the first subtle signs, mere ripples on the surface, that something fundamental had shifted. Mr. Thorne, immersed in spreadsheets and strategic planning, remained blissfully unaware, confident in his decisive action, but the meticulousness that once defined the corporate office was slowly, subtly, beginning to unravel. The silent observer, the one who had seen and cared for every detail, was gone, and his absence was starting to leave an indelible, if initially unnoticed, mark. The corporate office, once an emblem of pristine order and quiet efficiency, began its slow, almost imperceptible descent into disarray. What started as minor oversights soon accumulated, like dust motes gathering in sunlit corridors. Lost documents became a more frequent occurrence, creating small eddies of panic in various departments. The once reliable office equipment, from printers to presentation screens, seemed to develop new, frustrating quirks, often at the most inconvenient moments. A general sense of neglect began to permeate the atmosphere, a subtle shift that was harder to pinpoint than a spilled coffee, but equally pervasive. Mr. Thorne, engrossed in his strategic reports and quarterly projections, dismissed these burgeoning issues as isolated incidents. He attributed the printer jams to cheap toner cartridges, the occasional missing file to employee oversight, and the general drop in tidiness to the new cleaning crew's settling in period. He would often send curt emails to department heads, admonishing them for their perceived sloppiness, completely blind to the underlying cause. His focus remained squarely on the numbers, the bottom line, convinced that his reforms were yielding positive results, despite the growing anecdotal evidence to the contrary. He believed that any dip in productivity was a temporary anomaly, easily corrected by more stringent internal policies and a firmer hand. Yet, for those who had worked alongside Mr. Henderson for years, the changes were stark and unsettling. Flashbacks would often surface, unbidden, of the old janitor's quiet acts of service. They remembered how he would notice a loose screw on a desk chair and quietly tighten it, how he would preemptively replace a flickering fluorescent bulb before anyone even complained, how he seemed to possess an encyclopedic knowledge of where everything belonged, even the most obscure archived files. He had a sixth sense for impending problems, a meticulous attention to detail that went far beyond the scope of his official job description. He remembered birthdays, acknowledged personal struggles with a kind word, and always had a cheerful greeting, even at the earliest hours. These small, seemingly insignificant actions had woven a tapestry of hidden support, a silent infrastructure that had held the office together in ways no one had fully appreciated until it was gone. The growing unease among some of the long-term employees was palpable, though unspoken. Sarah, a senior manager who had been with the company for 20 years, found herself constantly searching for misplaced files that Henderson would have instinctively known the location of. Mark, an IT specialist, spent an increasing amount of time troubleshooting minor hardware issues that Henderson used to quietly resolve with a quick jiggle or a subtle adjustment. They would exchange knowing glances, a silent acknowledgement of the void left by the old janitor. They remembered his quiet efficiency, his uncanny ability to anticipate needs, his almost paternal care for the building and its occupants. They longed for the days when the office simply worked, without the constant minor frictions that now seemed to plague their every workday. Mr. Thorne, meanwhile, found his frustration mounting. Despite his relentless push for efficiency, productivity figures were not improving as rapidly as he had anticipated. In fact, some metrics showed a perplexing stagnation, even a slight dip. He held more meetings, sent more demanding memos, and introduced new performance targets, convinced that the problem lay with his employees' lack of dedication, rather than his own short-sighted decisions. He saw the growing piles of unsorted mail, the constantly smudged glass partitions, and the increasingly cluttered common areas, but attributed them to a general decline in standards that he was determined to reverse. He simply couldn't connect these seemingly disparate issues to the absence of one man. His vision was too broad, too focused on the grand strategic picture, to notice the intricate threads that had been quietly snipped away. The climax of this slow unraveling arrived with chilling precision. The company was on the cusp of finalizing its largest acquisition in a decade, a deal that promised to redefine its market position. Weeks of painstaking negotiations had culminated in a final, critical due diligence phase. A pivotal financial report, containing sensitive market analysis and proprietary data, was required for the final review by the acquiring company's legal team. The report, meticulously prepared by the finance department, was supposed to be securely stored in a designated locked cabinet in the CEO's administrative assistant's office, awaiting Thorne's final signature. However, on the morning of the crucial deadline, the report was nowhere to be found. Panic erupted. The administrative assistant, a usually unflappable woman named Eleanor, was distraught, swearing she had placed it there herself. Thorne's office was turned upside down. The finance department was interrogated. Every possible location was searched, but the comprehensive, multi-page document had vanished without a trace. The clock was ticking, and without this report, the entire multi-million-dollar deal, the crown jewel of Thorne's tenure, threatened to collapse. The meticulous order that Mr. Henderson had silently maintained, the invisible safety nets he had woven, were now starkly absent. The company, once a well-oiled machine, was now sputtering, on the verge of a catastrophic breakdown, all because of a missing report. The true weight of Henderson's absence and Thorne's grave misjudgment was about to be laid bare. The corporate office, now a hive of frantic, desperate activity, teetered on the brink of an unprecedented disaster. Mr. Thorne, his face a mask of barely contained fury and growing dread, barked orders into his phone, his voice echoing through the suddenly cavernous executive suite. The missing financial report was not just a document, it was the lifeblood of the impending acquisition, and its absence threatened to unravel months of strategic maneuvering, not to mention his carefully cultivated reputation as a visionary leader. He blamed everyone, from Eleanor in administration to the entire finance department, his accusations growing wilder with each passing hour. But deep down, a cold, unsettling fear began to creep in. This wasn't just an oversight. It felt like a systemic failure, a crumbling of the very foundations he believed he had strengthened. The situation was dire. The acquiring company's legal team had issued an ultimatum. The report by close of business, or the deal was off. The potential financial losses were staggering, the blow to the company's stock price unimaginable. Thorne paced his office, running a hand through his already disheveled hair, the weight of the impending catastrophe pressing down on him. His mind raced, recalling every detail of the report, every possible location, every person who might have touched it. But the information remained elusive, a ghost in the machine. Suddenly, a distant memory, a faint flicker from the past, surfaced in Thorne's mind. It was a story he had overheard months ago, dismissed then as mere office gossip, but now it resonated with an unsettling clarity. He remembered snippets of hushed conversations among the longer-tenured employees, tales of a time, perhaps 15 years prior, when a similar crisis had loomed. A critical patent application, vital to a new product launch, had gone missing from the legal department, threatening to derail the entire project. Panic had gripped the company, much like now, and then, almost miraculously, the document had reappeared, seemingly out of thin air, placed silently back on the legal director's desk. The whispers had credited Mr. Henderson, the janitor, with its recovery. He had apparently found it tucked away in an obscure, rarely used filing cabinet, misplaced during a late-night reorganization, and returned it without fanfare. He had simply known where to look, a silent guardian of the company's forgotten corners. Thorne, desperate, found himself clutching at this fragile straw of memory. He needed someone who remembered that incident, someone who could confirm the janitor's almost mythical ability to navigate the company's labyrinthine archives. He knew just the person. He called his administrative assistant, Eleanor, her voice still trembling from the earlier interrogation, and asked her to track down the contact information for a former executive named Arthur Finch, who had retired a few years prior. Finch had been with the company for decades, a living encyclopedia of its history. Within an hour, Finch's number was procured. Thorne dialed, his heart pounding with a mixture of hope and skepticism. The retired executive's voice, raspy with age, answered. Thorne quickly explained the present crisis, then cautiously broached the subject of the past incident, the missing patent application. Finch chuckled softly on the other end, a sound that grated on Thorne's nerves but also offered a strange sense of validation. Ah, yes. The great patent scare of '08, Finch reminisced, his voice laced with fondness. Everyone was running around like headless chickens. The legal team was tearing their hair out. But old Henderson, bless his quiet soul, he just walked in one morning, placed it right on Mr. Davies's desk, nodded, and went back to polishing the floors. Thorne listened intently, a growing sense of unease coiling in his gut. He found it? How? Henderson knew this building better than anyone, Mr. Thorne, Finch explained, a wistful tone entering his voice. He knew its quirks, its forgotten nooks, its hidden crannies. He remembered where things were put, even if they were put in the wrong place. He had an uncanny memory for details, a loyalty to this company that ran deeper than any of us truly appreciated. He didn't just clean, he cared. He was the silent backbone, the unseen guardian. He saved us more times than you'd imagine, always quietly, always without seeking praise. A truly invaluable man. That Henderson. Finch's words hung in the air, a stark indictment of Thorne's own actions. Invaluable. The word echoed in Thorne's mind, a painful counterpoint to his earlier dismissive judgment. He had seen an expense. Others had seen a pillar. The whispers about Henderson's past contributions, once easily ignored, now gained substance, solidifying into an undeniable truth. Thorne felt a pang of regret, a cold knot forming in his stomach. He had been so focused on cutting costs, on streamlining operations, that he had blindly discarded a resource far more valuable than any spreadsheet could quantify. The pressure on Thorne intensified exponentially. The acquiring company's CEO had just called, his tone polite but firm, reiterating the deadline. The company's reputation, its very future, was now hanging precariously by a thread. Thorne, alone in his office, felt the walls closing in. He looked around at the opulent surroundings, the symbols of his power, now feeling hollow and meaningless. He had alienated his employees, dismissed a loyal worker, and now faced the consequences of his arrogance. He was utterly, completely lost. As the afternoon wore on and the frantic search yielded nothing, a junior employee, a quiet young woman named Chloe from the archives department, nervously approached Eleanor. "Excuse me, Eleanor," she whispered, holding a small, dust-covered wooden box. "I was cleaning out an old storage closet in the sub-basement, one that hasn't been touched in years, full of really old company records, mostly from the 80s. And I found this. It was tucked away behind some dusty ledgers. It has Mr. Henderson's name etched on it. Eleanor, her eyes wide with a flicker of hope, took the box. It was old, intricately carved, and looked like a personal keepsake. "Mr. Henderson's?" she murmured, a strange premonition dawning on her. She carried it carefully to Thorne's office, her heart pounding. Thorne, slumped in his chair, looked up, his eyes bloodshot. Eleanor placed the box on his desk. "Chloe from Archives found this, sir. It has Mr. Henderson's name on it." Thorne stared at the box, a sudden, almost desperate curiosity seizing him. It was a simple, unassuming object, yet it felt charged with an unknown significance. He ran his fingers over the faded, hand-carved letters of Henderson's name. What secrets could this old janitor, this invaluable man, have kept? And could any of them hold the key to the company's salvation? The realization dawned on him. What he needed wasn't just the report, but the man who knew where to find it, the man he had so carelessly discarded. But first, this box. He reached for it, his fingers brushing against the cold, aged wood, a silent testament to a life lived quietly within these very walls. The box was locked, but a small, tarnished brass key lay beside it, almost hidden against the dark wood. He picked up the key, his hand trembling slightly. This simple wooden box, a forgotten relic, might just be the last hope. Thorne inserted the small, tarnished brass key into the lock of the wooden box. With a soft click, it yielded, a sound that seemed to reverberate through the silent office, amplifying the weight of the moment. He lifted the lid slowly, revealing not a collection of trinkets or personal mementos, but an astonishingly meticulous record of the company's history. It was a treasure trove of forgotten knowledge, a silent testament to Mr. Henderson's unparalleled dedication. Inside, nestled amongst neatly organized folders and faded newspaper clippings, were documents, handwritten notes, and even old blueprints, all meticulously cataloged and cross-referenced. His eyes scanned the contents, a sense of awe mingling with a growing knot of shame. There, tucked away in a small leather-bound journal, were the personal notes of Mr. Henderson himself. The janitor's elegant, if slightly shaky, script-filled page after page, chronicling not just the daily minutiae of the building's upkeep, but also observations about the company's evolution, its triumphs, and its near catastrophes. He wrote about the installation of the new server room in '98, noting the specific wiring quirks and potential vulnerabilities. He detailed the construction of the West Wing extension in 2005, complete with diagrams of hidden pipework and electrical conduits that no official record seemed to contain. Thorne's gaze fell upon a particular entry, dated just a few years prior, documenting a system upgrade that had gone awry, causing a critical data loss. Henderson had not only identified the problem, but had also, through sheer ingenuity and memory, helped reconstruct the lost files from an obscure backup tape no one else remembered existed. His notes described how he had worked tirelessly through the night, fueled by stale coffee and an unwavering sense of duty, while the IT department had been in a panic. He hadn't sought recognition then, just as he hadn't for the patent application. He had simply done what was necessary to protect the company he clearly cherished. Further delving into the journal, Thorne found more. Stories of quiet sacrifices, staying late to fix a leaky pipe that could have damaged vital equipment, coming in on weekends to ensure the heating system was ready for a sudden cold snap. There were anecdotes about covering for absent security guards, noticing discrepancies in inventory, and even once, discreetly helping a junior employee who had accidentally locked herself out of a crucial meeting room with a presentation due in minutes. Each entry painted a picture of a man who saw the company not as a mere workplace, but as a living entity, a trust he was sworn to protect, regardless of his official title or meager salary. He had been its silent, ubiquitous guardian, a shadow figure who held the very fabric of the organization together with his quiet vigilance. The missing information, The vital report that threatened to unravel the acquisition was there too. It wasn't the original document itself, but a detailed handwritten summary, complete with annotations and cross-references to other files, some of which Thorne realized were now probably lost. Henderson had meticulously broken down the complex data, highlighting key figures and potential risks, anticipating questions before they were even asked. It was a masterclass in foresight and attention to detail, far surpassing anything the team of highly paid analysts had produced. He had clearly made his own copy, or at least a highly detailed summary, understanding its long-term importance, perhaps fearing its eventual misplacement. Thorne felt a profound jolt of realization, a cold, hard truth settling deep within him. He had dismissed Mr. Henderson as an expendable cost, a relic of a bygone era. He had viewed him through the narrow lens of a balance sheet, failing to see the immeasurable value of loyalty, experience, and an almost paternal dedication. Henderson hadn't just cleaned the floors. He had been the company's memory, its conscience, its silent, steadfast heart. He had treated the company as his own, nurturing it, protecting it, understanding its every pulse and tremor. The irony was crushing. Thorne, the great CEO, the visionary, had been so intent on purging inefficiency that he had jettisoned the very foundation upon which the company's stability rested. He had seen a tired old man dozing off, and in his arrogance, he had failed to see the decades of unwavering commitment that had led to that fleeting moment of exhaustion. The cost-cutting measure had, in fact, cost the company its very existence. A wave of intense regret washed over Thorne, a feeling far deeper and more piercing than the earlier pangs of unease. He had been so utterly, catastrophically wrong. The meticulous records, the personal notes, the quiet acts of heroism, they all screamed one undeniable truth. Mr. Henderson was not just a janitor. He was an invaluable asset. A living archive, a silent hero whose contributions had consistently saved the company from crises far greater than a dirty floor. The solution to the immediate crisis was now in his hands, thanks to Henderson's foresight. The detailed summary in the box was enough to piece together the critical information to satisfy the acquiring company and to avert the imminent disaster. But that wasn't enough. Thorne realized that saving the company was only half the battle. The other, far more important half, was making amends, seeking forgiveness, and acknowledging the profound error of his ways. He needed to find Mr. Henderson. But where was he? The thought gnawed at him, a new, desperate urgency replacing the fear of corporate failure. He had discarded a treasure, and now, humbled and shattered, he had to find the man he had so cruelly cast aside. The box, once a symbol of a forgotten past, was now a beacon, illuminating the path to redemption, but also highlighting the vast empty space left by Henderson's absence. Thorne, consumed by a profound sense of shame and an overwhelming need for atonement, immediately launched a personal, desperate search for Mr. Henderson. The corporate office, once his domain of ruthless efficiency, now felt like a hollow monument to his colossal misjudgment. He began by contacting the Human Resources Department, a place he usually only visited to sign off on dismissals. The HR manager, a young woman named Sarah, looked at him with a mixture of surprise and slight apprehension as he inquired about Mr. Henderson's last known address. The file, thin and impersonal, offered little beyond a residential street in an older part of the city. He drove there himself, the corporate sedan feeling incongruous on the quiet, tree-lined street. Henderson's apartment building was a modest 3-story brick structure, its age showing in the faded paint and slightly sagging porch. He climbed the worn steps, his heart pounding with an unfamiliar mix of dread and hope. He knocked on the door of apartment 2B, the number etched into the brass plate now tarnished with time. There was no answer. He knocked again, louder this time, but the silence that followed was heavy and final. The apartment was empty. A small, handwritten "For Rent" sign, yellowed at the edges, was taped to the inside of the window, visible through the sheer curtains. A wave of despair washed over Thorne. He had arrived too late. He had driven the man away, not just from the company, but from his home. As he descended the steps, a woman watering plants on the ground floor porch looked up, her eyes curious. Thorne, swallowing his pride, approached her. "Excuse me," he began, his voice uncharacteristically tentative. "I'm looking for Mr. Henderson. He used to live in 2B. The woman, her face wrinkled with age and kindness, smiled sadly. "Oh, dear Mr. Henderson. He moved out a few weeks ago, not long after he lost his job." Her gaze sharpened slightly, as if she recognized him from a newspaper photo. "He was very quiet about it, but we all knew. He was a good man, Mr. Henderson. Always helped out, carried groceries, fixed Mrs. Rodriguez's leaky faucet." She paused, a thoughtful frown creasing her brow. "He seemed to lose a bit of his sparkle after that. He was always so proud of his work, you know." Thorne felt a sharp pang in his chest. Did he say where he was going?" The neighbor shook her head. "No, dear. Just said he needed a smaller place. Somewhere quieter. He looked tired, very tired. He sold most of his things, kept just a few boxes. A young man from the church helped him move. Said he was going somewhere outside the city, perhaps with some distant relatives." The vague information was a cold comfort. Thorne thanked her, his voice hoarse, and returned to his car. The emotional toll of this encounter was far greater than he had anticipated. He had always prided himself on his ability to make tough, unemotional decisions, to detach himself from the human cost of corporate efficiency. Now, the human cost was staring him in the face, a direct consequence of his own arrogance and cruelty. Mr. Henderson, a man who had dedicated his life to the company, had been forced to sell his belongings and seek refuge with distant relatives, all because Thorne had judged him based on a fleeting moment of exhaustion. He spent the next few days exhausting every possible lead. He contacted the local churches, hoping to find the young man who had helped Henderson move. He even discreetly hired a private investigator, though he felt a deep sense of irony in spending company money to find a man he had so eagerly dismissed as an expense. Each dead end, each unanswered phone call, each sympathetic shake of a head from a former acquaintance deepened the chasm of guilt within him. He learned that Henderson had politely refused any severance pay beyond what was legally required, stating he didn't want to be a burden. This selfless act, in stark contrast to Thorne's own actions, further amplified his remorse. One evening, as Thorne sat in his opulent office, surrounded by the very symbols of his success, he felt an emptiness he had never known. The company was saved, the deal was secure, but the victory felt hollow, tainted by the shadow of Mr. Henderson. He pulled out the journal again, reading Henderson's meticulous notes, his quiet observations, his unwavering loyalty. He saw a man who truly cared, a man who consistently put the well-being of the company, and often its employees, before his own. A small, almost insignificant detail in one of Henderson's entries caught his eye. A casual mention of a cousin Margaret in Willow Creek, who sometimes sent him homemade jam. Willow Creek was a small, rural town in the next county, known for its quiet retirement communities and serene landscapes. It was a long shot, a desperate lead, but it was the only one he had left. The drive to Willow Creek was long and contemplative. The manicured lawns of the city gave way to rolling hills and dense forests. Thorne felt a strange sense of anticipation, a nervous energy he hadn't experienced since his early days of closing major deals. This, he realized, was far more important than any deal. This was about restoring a piece of his own humanity. After several hours of searching and asking around, he found himself outside a modest, single-story house on the outskirts of Willow Creek. A small, vibrant garden bloomed in the front yard, and a gentle breeze rustled through the leaves of an old oak tree. As he approached the front door, he saw a figure sitting on the porch swing, wrapped in a thin blanket, gazing out at the setting sun. It was Mr. Henderson, thinner, frailer, his once sharp eyes now holding a distant, weary look. He seemed smaller, almost diminished. The sight was a punch to Thorne's gut, a visceral confirmation of the direct, devastating impact of his actions. Henderson was not just retired. He was struggling, vulnerable, a man whose quiet dignity had been stripped away, largely by Thorne's own hand. The weight of his guilt pressed down on him, heavy and suffocating. He had found him, but the confrontation ahead would be far more difficult than he had ever imagined. Thorne stepped onto the small porch, the floorboards creaking softly under his weight, a stark contrast to the silent, polished marble of his office building. Mr. Henderson slowly turned his head, his gaze unfocused at first, then sharpening as he recognized the imposing figure standing before him. A flicker of surprise, quickly followed by a weary resignation, crossed his aged features. There was no anger, no accusation, only a profound sense of exhaustion. "Mr. Henderson," Thorne began, his voice surprisingly soft, almost a whisper, a tone he rarely used in professional settings. He felt a lump form in his throat, the words catching. I've been looking for you." Henderson simply nodded, his eyes fixed on some distant point beyond Thorne, as if the CEO were merely a transient distraction in his quiet, twilight existence. His silence was more potent than any shouted rebuke, a testament to the depth of his disillusionment. Thorne felt a wave of profound discomfort, a sensation alien to a man accustomed to commanding respect and immediate answers. He realized, with a sickening clarity, that he was utterly out of his element, stripped of his usual power and influence. Here, in this quiet corner of the world, his corporate title meant nothing. I owe you an apology," Thorne continued, finding the words difficult to articulate. He swallowed hard, forcing himself to meet Henderson's gaze. "A profound apology. What I did, it was unforgivable. I was short-sighted, arrogant, and cruel. I judged you unfairly, and I caused you immense hardship. I am truly sorry, Mr. Henderson." The apology hung in the air, heavy and raw. Henderson finally shifted, his frail hands adjusting the blanket around his shoulders. He looked directly at Thorne then, a glimmer of something akin to pity in his eyes. "An apology doesn't change what happened, Mr. Thorne," he said, his voice raspy but clear, devoid of bitterness, yet laced with an undeniable sorrow. "It doesn't give me back my home, or my routine, or the life I built around that company." Thorne flinched as if struck. The quiet dignity in Henderson's words, the absence of anger, only amplified the weight of Thorne's guilt. He had expected rage, perhaps tears, anything but this calm, resigned acceptance of his fate. It made Thorne's regret all the more unbearable. "I know," Thorne responded, his voice thick with emotion. "I know it doesn't, and I wouldn't dare ask for your forgiveness right now. But I had to tell you. I had to face you and acknowledge the damage I caused." He paused, gathering his courage. "The company, it's in trouble again, Mr. Henderson. Serious trouble. The kind of trouble you averted before. The kind only you seem to understand how to fix." Henderson's eyebrows subtly arched, a flicker of his old self, a hint of the man who knew every nook and cranny of that building, every secret it held. "Trouble?" he murmured, almost to himself, the word tasting foreign on his tongue in this peaceful setting. Thorne quickly explained, detailing the missing information, the jeopardized deal, the desperate search that had led him to Henderson's hidden legacy. He spoke of the meticulous journal, the hidden notes, the profound understanding Henderson possessed of the company's intricate history and vulnerabilities. He laid bare the company's current crisis, admitting his own failures and the critical need for Henderson's unique knowledge. As Thorne spoke, he watched Henderson closely. The janitor's initial weariness slowly gave way to a subtle shift in his demeanor. A spark, faint but present, ignited in his eyes. It wasn't a spark of personal interest or vindication, but rather a reflection of the deep, ingrained loyalty he harbored for the institution itself, a loyalty that transcended his personal pain and Thorne's egregious error. "It's about the old contracts, isn't it?" Henderson finally asked, his voice gaining a touch of its former clarity. "The ones from the early 90s with the international consortium? There was a clause, a very specific one, about data retention protocols in case of a server migration." Thorne stared, dumbfounded. He had spent weeks poring over convoluted legal documents, and Henderson, from a distant memory, had pinpointed the exact issue. "Yes," Thorne breathed, a wave of relief washing over him. "Precisely. We can't find the original signed copy of the addendum. Our digital archives are corrupted, and the physical one seems to have vanished." Henderson closed his eyes for a moment, a deep wrinkle forming between his brows as he delved into the vast archives of his memory. "It was stored, not in the main vault," he began, his eyes still closed, "but in the old sub-basement behind the decommissioned boiler. There was a metal strongbox bolted to the wall. Mr. Peterson, the CEO at the time, was very particular about those specific contracts. He didn't trust the new digital system completely." Thorne felt a jolt of pure excitement, quickly followed by a profound sense of humility. This man, whom he had dismissed as an expendable relic, held the key to the company's survival, a key he had meticulously guarded, even in his forced exile. "Mr. Henderson?" Thorne said, his voice strained with a mixture of hope and shame. If you would be willing to help us locate it, to guide us." Henderson finally opened his eyes, meeting Thorne's gaze with a newfound resolve. The weariness was still there, etched into the lines around his eyes, but it was now tempered by a quiet strength. "It's not for you, Mr. Thorne," he stated, his voice firm. "And it's not for me. It's for the company. For all the good people who still work there, who built it into what it is. It deserves to survive." Thorne felt a profound sense of gratitude and respect. Henderson's loyalty was absolute, unwavering, a beacon of integrity that shamed Thorne's past actions. He had come seeking a solution to a corporate crisis, but he had found something far more significant, a lesson in true dedication and selfless service. The bridge between them, once shattered by Thorne's arrogance, was now slowly, meticulously being rebuilt, not on a foundation of personal amends, but on a shared, unspoken reverence for the institution they both, in their vastly different ways, had served. Henderson, despite his frail condition and the immense personal cost, was willing to help, driven by an unwavering commitment to the company, a commitment that shamed Thorne to his very core. The climax of this journey was not just the discovery of a document, but the rediscovery of human value, of loyalty that transcended the transactional nature of business. With Henderson's invaluable guidance, Thorne immediately dispatched a team to the old corporate building. The instructions were precise, almost surgical in their detail, delivered by Henderson himself over a crackling phone line, his voice gaining strength with each recalled memory. He described the sub-basement's forgotten access panel, the dusty, cobweb-laden passage behind the boiler, and the exact coordinates of the metal strongbox. Within hours, the original signed addendum, yellowed with age but perfectly preserved, was recovered. The missing piece of the puzzle, the linchpin of the entire multi-million-dollar deal, was finally in Thorne's hands, thanks to the man he had so carelessly discarded. The news spread through the company like wildfire. The deal, once teetering on the brink of collapse, was not only salvaged, but secured, bringing with it a wave of renewed confidence and financial stability. Thorne, standing before a jubilant board of directors and an anxious workforce, did not hesitate. He publicly acknowledged the monumental error of his ways, attributing the company's salvation entirely to Mr. Henderson's foresight, dedication, and unparalleled institutional memory. His confession was stark, raw, and deeply humbling, a stark contrast to the arrogant CEO he had once been. He spoke of Henderson not as a janitor, but as the company's true guardian, a silent sentinel who had protected its legacy long before Thorne had ever stepped foot in the executive suite. The immediate aftermath saw a flurry of activity. Thorne, a changed man, personally visited Henderson again, not with an apology this time, but with an offer. He spoke of a new role, an advisory position, one that would leverage Henderson's profound knowledge and connection to the company without demanding the physical toll of his previous job. It was a role crafted specifically for him, one that carried both prestige and a salary commensurate with his true, rediscovered value. Henderson listened patiently, his gaze unwavering. The offer was generous, a testament to Thorne's genuine remorse and his newfound understanding. Yet, a quiet dignity settled over him as he gently, but firmly, declined. "My time cleaning the floors is done, Mr. Thorne," he said, his voice soft but resolute. "And my time advising from the sidelines, that too feels out of place now. I gave my life to that building, to that company. It's time for me to live a life of my own, free from the dust and the echoes of the past." Thorne felt a pang of disappointment, but also a profound respect for Henderson's unwavering self-possession. He understood. Henderson had given everything, and now, in his twilight years, he deserved peace. However, Thorne was not to be deterred entirely. He proposed another solution, one that Henderson, after some consideration, finally accepted. A foundation, bearing Henderson's name, was established within the company, the Henderson Legacy Fund, dedicated to preserving the company's history, digitizing its archives, and, most importantly, providing support and recognition for long-serving, often unseen, employees. Henderson would be its honorary chairman, a role that allowed him to contribute his wisdom and experience without the daily demands of corporate life. He would guide its mission, ensuring that no quiet contributor would ever again be overlooked or undervalued. The emotional resolution between the two men was not one of effusive declarations, but of quiet understanding. Thorne had found his redemption, not just in saving the company, but in acknowledging his profound error and striving to rectify it. Henderson had found his recognition, not in returning to a job, but in having his lifelong dedication finally seen and honored. His quiet dignity had prevailed, transforming a ruthless CEO into a more empathetic leader. In the months that followed, the corporate office began to transform. Thorne's leadership style softened, becoming more inclusive, more appreciative of every individual's contribution, no matter how seemingly small. He instituted regular legacy talks, where long-term employees, much like Henderson, were invited to share their stories and insights, fostering a sense of community and shared history that had been sorely lacking. The company thrived, not just financially, but culturally, becoming a place where loyalty was cherished and experience valued. One late afternoon, Thorne found himself standing in the main lobby, a space Henderson had diligently maintained for decades. His gaze drifted to a particular corner, near the massive potted fern, where Henderson would often take a moment to lean, surveying his domain, his presence almost invisible. The corner was now empty, yet it felt filled. It was no longer just a space. It was a silent monument to the enduring lesson Thorne had learned. The unseen guardian might have departed, but his spirit, his meticulous care, his unwavering loyalty now permeated the very fabric of the company. Thorne understood, with a profound clarity, that true efficiency wasn't just about cutting costs, but about cultivating a culture of respect, recognizing the invaluable contributions of every single person, especially those who worked quietly in the shadows. The company, now led by a wiser, more humane hand, would never forget the lesson taught by a simple janitor, a lesson etched into the very soul of its unforeseen, brighter future.